Let's dive into a really profound story from the Gospel of Mark. It's one of those stories that starts way up on a mountaintop with this blinding flash of divine glory, and it ends in a quiet room with a lesson that completely turns our whole understanding of power, faith, and what it actually means to be great completely upside down.
And it really forces us to ask this, kind of uncomfortable question. What if our entire definition of greatness, of success, of what power looks like, what if it's all completely backward?
All right, so our story kicks off on a high mountain. And in the Bible, mountains are always these places for big, divine encounters. Jesus takes his inner circle, that's Peter, James, and John, away from the crowds, because what they're about to see is, well, it's just off the charts.
And then, boom, he's transfigured. Mark's gospel says his clothes became radiant, like so intensely white that no bleach on earth could even come close. And as if that wasn't mind-blowing enough, two towering figures from Israel's history, Moses and Elijah, just appear and start talking with Jesus. So you can just picture the disciples, right? They are totally freaked out.
Okay, so what in the world is going on here? This isn't just some random, weird, mystical event. No, Mark is being really intentional. He's weaving together these powerful threads from Israel's history to make a huge point about who Jesus is. You see, this whole scene is just packed with these echoes of Moses on Mount Sinai. It's totally intentional. Think about it. Jesus brings three companions, just like Moses did. His appearance gets radiant, just like Moses' face shone. A cloud, the very symbol of God's presence, overshadows them. But here's the kicker, the big difference. This time, a voice speaks from the cloud. See, this isn't just a rerun, it's a major upgrade.
So, why Moses and Elijah? Well, it's a lot deeper than just saying, oh, they represent the law and the prophets. I mean, both of them had their own crazy encounters with God on a mountain, but even more importantly, they were both huge figures in what we call eschatological hope, which is just a fancy way of saying the hope for God's grand finale in history. So having them show up, that's a massive flashing sign that says, hey, that moment you've all been waiting for, it's happening right now in Jesus.
And then you get the command straight from the heavens, echoing what was said at Jesus' baptism, but with a new instruction. Listen to him. This is a direct callback, a direct link to a prophecy back in Deuteronomy 18, where Moses promised that God would raise up a new prophet just like him, and told the people, it is to him you shall listen. The message couldn't be clearer. Jesus is that prophet, and his authority trumps everyone else's, period.
Okay, but right after this incredible mountaintop high, the story just slams on the brakes and takes this jarring turn. They come down from all that divine glory and walk right into the messiness and chaos of human failure waiting for them down in the valley.
And to contrast is just wow. Up on the mountain, you have divine order, total clarity. Down below, it's just arguments, confusion, and total powerlessness. So the 9 disciples who got left behind, they're in the middle of this huge public mess. A father brings them his tormented son, but they can't do anything. They are completely powerless to help. And get this, their failure is so bad, it makes the father start to wonder if even Jesus has the power to do anything. So when Jesus arrives, his rebuke is for everyone, a faithless generation. He's not just talking to his disciples, he's drawing a line all the way back to the faithlessness of Israel in the wilderness.
So this desperate father turns to Jesus, but you can tell his faith is just hanging by a thread. He says, if you can do anything, have compassion on us. And Jesus kind of pushes back on that if you can. And the father just cries out what has to be one of the most real, honest prayers in the entire Bible. I believe, help my unbelief. It's such a perfect picture of what faith actually looks like. It's not about being certain. It's about admitting you're weak and asking for help.
So later, the disciples pull Jesus aside and ask, why couldn't we do it? Why did we fail? And his answer gets right to the heart of the problem. He tells them this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. Now, he's not talking about some magic words. He's talking about their whole posture, their whole attitude. They failed because they started relying on their own power, on the authority they'd been given, instead of staying in this state of total, constant dependence on God.
But if you think they learned their lesson, well, what happens next is even more telling. See, their failure in the valley came from relying on their own power, and that very same impulse, that focus on themselves, is exactly what's driving their next conversation, and it just shows how far off they still are.
I mean, the whiplash here is just incredible. Jesus lays it out for them. For the second time, he's going to be handed over, killed, and then he'll rise again. And what do? Literally right after he says this, they start arguing about which one of them is the greatest. It's just mind-boggling.
He's talking about sacrifice, and they're talking about status. Now, to be fair, in their world, which was all about honor and shame, this kind of jockeying for position was kind of normal. It was a competition. But that's the whole problem, right? They were still playing by the world's rules, and they were completely missing the point of this upside-down kingdom Jesus was talking about.
So, Jesus sits them all down. He knows they've gone quiet, and he knows exactly what they were arguing about. And he uses this as a moment for one of the most revolutionary lessons in the entire gospel.
He says to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the fundamental rule of his kingdom. It's not about climbing the ladder, it's about choosing to go to the very bottom to serve. And just to make sure they never forget it, he gives them this powerful, living example.
So Jesus grabs a child and puts them right in the middle of these grown men who are all worried about their status. Now, when we see a child, we think innocence, right? Or humility. But that's not what was going on here. In the ancient world, a child had literally zero social status. None. They were just seen as dependents, as weak. They couldn't add anything to your honor.
So here's the knockout punch. Jesus says that when you welcome one such child, a person with no status, no power, nothing to offer you, when you do that in his name, you're actually welcoming him. And when you welcome him, you're welcoming God the Father. See? Real greatness isn't about having important people serve you. It's about you lowering yourself to serve and welcome the people the world says are nobodies.
And that's where this ancient story just crashing right into our world today. It's a challenge to every single ladder we try to climb. If true greatness is found not in racking up titles or followers, but in choosing to serve the person with the least status, the one who's most overlooked, then who is that person in your life? Who is the child that Jesus is calling you to welcome?